I'm going to see if I can do this on Zoom and do it quickly because otherwise I won't have time. I have to get to class, talk about Augustine. At the time of the recording of this video, I've managed to record enough videos, mostly for the Philosophers and Their Own Words playlist, to last me about 2 years of videos airing on Mondays according to the regular rotation. So I'm going to see if I can do some other things and branch out a bit and have more stuff on other days of the week. More content, not just one video per week every week. This, I hope, will air on Thursday in the near future, sometime in March or April 2021. All right, so let's share this screen. What I want to do in this video is look at a passage in John Stuart Mill's Utilitarianism. Now, I think it's important to look at original sources. Don't just look at summaries people make of them. They're usually oversimplified and sometimes wrong, misleading. And I think it's good to not oversimplify a moral theory, like by saying that utilitarianism doesn't care about the rules, or Kant doesn't care about happiness at all, when in fact utilitarianism does care about the rules, and we're going to see that in a moment in this video. And Kant does care about happiness, but we can talk about that another day perhaps. But the real reason I want to make this video is just to look at this one sentence from John Stuart Mill, because I think it's a glorious sentence. Mainly, I just want to interpret this sentence. We're in Utilitarianism, chapter 2, in which John Stuart Mill responds to various objections that have been made to his theory of utilitarianism. We want to look at this paragraph. And here is an objection people make to utilitarianism. People say that utilitarianism teaches that you do what is useful and ignore what is right. And so sometimes it would be useful to tell a lie, which is not right. Utilitarianism says you should do what's useful. So utilitarianism says you should do what's wrong, so it's a bad moral theory. And Mill says this is not the case. His critics will say the expedient or the useful, here we go. This is the sentence. Not the main sentence of this video. He's still representing the views of the objectors to utilitarianism. They say that the expedient or the useful is often to tell a lie. And then Mill responds in this sentence, and this is the one we want to look at. Before we look at this sentence, let's mention the next sentence. When Mill says, the rule that you need to tell the truth does have some exceptions. But let's look at this sentence. But inasmuch as the cultivation in ourselves of a sensitive feeling on the subject of veracity is one of the most useful, and the enfeeblement of that feeling one of the most hurtful things to which our conduct can be instrumental, and inasmuch as any even unintentional deviation from truth does that much towards weakening the trustworthiness of human assertion, which is not only the principal support of all present social well-being, but the insufficiency of which does more than any one thing that could be named to keep back civilization, virtue, everything on which human happiness on the largest scale depends, we feel that the violation for present advantage of a rule of such transcendent expediency is not expedient, that he who, for the sake of convenience to himself or to some other individual, does what depends on him to deprive mankind of the good, and inflict upon them the evil involved in the greater or less reliance which they can place in each other's word, acts the part of one of their worst enemies. That's a huge sentence. One reason for this video is to take a nice sentence from Mill, a beautiful sentence, and try to make it clearer because it's too long. Most of us have trouble understanding a sentence like this, so I'm going to try to fix it for us. All right. If I gave a short paraphrase, it would be something like this. Telling the truth is so important and useful that telling a lie almost always is not useful. Not in the long term. There may be some short-term advantage to telling a lie, but it's almost always worse than telling the truth. Because you might have some small short-term advantage, but truthfulness is a super useful thing. The habit of character of truthfulness, the virtue of honesty is a super useful thing. And the trustworthiness of human assertion is a super useful thing. So now let's go to over here where I've been analyzing this. Now, this is nothing yet for our interest. This is the result of me working on this, trying to record this very video and failing because I didn't have enough disk space to record it. I talked too long. So here's where we start. Here's our big sentence. Let's break it up into different clauses. Here are the different clauses of the sentence. The first clause is concerned with cultivating in ourselves a sensitive feeling on the subject of veracity and how useful that is. Second clause talks about how any failure to tell the truth weakens the trustworthiness of human assertion and why the trustworthiness of human assertion matters. Next clause draws a conclusion from these things and says that violating the rule that you should tell the truth for a short-term advantage is not actually useful. Second conclusion, if you undermine the trustworthiness of human assertion, you are an enemy of the human race. This here's premise one. No, let's not annotate with Zoom controls yet. Let's go ahead and label them. Premise one with its using logic class terminology premise indicator, in as much as premise two with its premise indicator, conclusion one and conclusion two. Premise one, if I'm not mistaken, primarily supports conclusion one. Premise two primarily supports conclusion two. And you should see some nifty little arrows I'm drawing on the screen. But premise two was still a huge clause. So let's make it a little simpler, at least easier to understand. Here's what premise two is talking about. Failing to tell the truth weakens the trustworthiness of human assertion. This is super important, the trustworthiness of human assertion. Why is it super important? Because it's the strongest support of social well-being. And an insufficiency of human assertion does more than anything else to undermine things on which human happiness depends, including civilization and virtue and more. So here's Mill's argument. Premise about the importance of the habit of telling the truth because it's useful. Premise about the importance of the trustworthiness of human assertion and how failing to tell the truth weakens that trustworthiness. Conclusion about how it's not actually useful if you fail to support in yourself the virtue of honesty. And you're actually harming mankind if you weaken the trustworthiness of human assertion. Now, is there a time when weakening the trustworthiness of human assertion is worth it? Yeah, totally. That's what this sentence is about. When dishonesty is the only way to save an innocent person from a murderer, yeah, go ahead and lie. That's Mill's view. Then you are weakening human assertion's trustworthiness, which does all this harm, but if you're saving an innocent person, the saving of the innocent person might outweigh whatever you're doing to weaken the trustworthiness of human assertion. What you can't do is weaken the trustworthiness of human assertion for some small short-term convenience for yourself. Now here, I'm cleaning up the language to make the logic of the analysis a little more clear. And actually here, we're going to stop using Mill's own words. We're going to paraphrase Mill to make it a little clearer what his logic is. We'll try to keep the meaning of what Mill says, but we'll change some of the words. Premise one, I think, can be rephrased from this to this. One of the most useful things you can do with your actions is cultivating yourself that virtue of honesty, a sensitive feeling on the subject of veracity. One of the most harmful things you can do with your actions is to weaken that feeling. Our actions affect our character. This is how human nature is constructed. This is how habits work. This is what Mill talks about in chapter 4 of utilitarianism. This is something Aristotle talked about. Now, I actually think that one premise is maybe best considered two premises, if you want to get technical, and which we're trying to do here. We're trying to make the logic as clear as possible. Here's what premise one, that first clause in Mill's argument, ends up as. Two premises. or a conjunction of two claims, but let's split them up to make the logic as clear as possible. One of the most useful things you can do with your actions is to cultivate in yourself a sensitive feeling on the subject of veracity, the virtue of honesty. That's the first premise. Second premise, one of the most harmful things you can do with your actions is to weaken that virtue of honesty. Now let's go to what is now premise 3, the second clause of Mill's giant sentence. Don't even try to follow my keyboard shortcutting. Here's what you get from premise. Here's what you get from the second clause in Mill's sentence, reducing it to its logic, or drawing the logic out of it. Reducing might be the wrong verb. Here's what you get from the second clause in Mill's sentence. The second clause, if anyone's losing track of the words, well, you can pause the video and find Mill on the internet for yourself. Here's the second clause. Pause the video to read that if you need to. Here's what it means. Any deviation from truth weakens the trustworthiness of human assertion. And the trustworthiness of human assertion is the strongest support of all present social well-being. Society depends on, social well-being depends on, the well-being of society depends on human claims being trustworthy. And an insufficiency of the trustworthiness of human assertion is more than anything else to keep back civilization, virtue, everything else on which human happiness on the largest scale depends. Now, actually, I think yes. I keep doing my keyboard shortcutting. I'll get back to where I was in my earlier attempt to make this video. I realized we might need to rephrase premise 5 to make it a little more clear. Now, I'm still working on the right way to rephrase this. Human happiness on the largest scale depends on civilization, virtue, and some other things, all of which, civilization, virtue, and these other things, depend on the trustworthiness of human assertion. I think I just need to make sure this more than any one thing is included in my rephrasing of premise 5, and I think we'll be okay. The insufficiency of the trustworthiness of human assertion does more than one thing. Human happiness on the largest scale depends on civilization, virtue, and other things which depend above all on the trustworthiness of human assertion. That's what we get from clause 2. So clause 1 gave us these two premises about the usefulness of the virtue of honesty, the usefulness of cultivating sensitive feeling on the subject of veracity, and the harmfulness of weakening that feeling. Clause 2 gave us these three premises. Deviating from the truth weakens the trustworthiness of human assertion. That trustworthiness is necessary for social well-being. That trustworthiness is the primary support for a lot of things human happiness depends on. And that leads to this conclusion, therefore, the violation for a present advantage of violation for some short-term advantage of the rule that you should be honest is not useful. Now, if you want to get technical, you could force a rephrasing of this. We're dealing with everyday situations. We're not phrasing this perfectly. We don't have time to. I have to go teach Augusta. And Mill didn't have time to phrase everything perfectly. The murder at the door. There might be a short-term advantage to saving an innocent person from murder at the door when you can only do that by lying. So we're not talking about that. Violation of a short-term advantage of the rule you should be honest. This refers to the ordinary circumstances in which people tell lies for short-term reasons, okay? The circumstances in which the objectors to utilitarianism were talking about, the circumstances which they were talking about. It's often useful, they say, to avoid some momentary embarrassment or get something useful in the short term to ourselves or others. Just tell a lie. We're talking about ordinary circumstances. Maybe I will try to phrase it a little more precisely. breaking the rule that you should be honest just for some short-term advantage and in the ways in which people ordinarily lie, in the usual ways. Breaking the rule that you should be honest just to achieve some short-term advantage I got it. There we go. This should capture what Mill's getting at pretty closely. In ordinary circumstances, breaking the rule that you should be honest just to achieve some short-term advantage is not useful. That's the conclusion he gets from premises 1, 2, and 3. Now, this may take a little more work to rearrange. Anyone who, in ordinary circumstances, aims to achieve some short-term convenience for someone, maybe himself, maybe someone else. Now, here's where the rephrasing gets harder to do. Does what depends on him. This is referencing clause 3. Does what depends on him to deprive mankind of the good means undermining the trustworthiness of human assertion. I'm afraid there's no way to draw what Mill is getting at directly out of his language in this clause. Clause 4 here is clearly referencing clause 3. At least it's clear to me. I hope it's clear to you. I'm going to rephrase it accordingly. Anyone who, in ordinary circumstances, pretty clear to me, to achieve some short-term convenience for someone, anyone who lies in ordinary circumstances and to achieve some short-term convenience for someone undermines the trustworthiness of human assertion. Actually, it is pretty clear from the text itself. The greater or less reliance which they can place in each other's word, that's referring back to the trustworthiness of human assertion. Anyone who lies in ordinary circumstances and to achieve some short-term convenience for someone undermines the trustworthiness of human assertion. The undermining of which does harm. You notice what was going on here? This was another dang premise. Human happiness depends on the largest scale, blah, blah, blah. Trustworthiness of human assertion is important. Anyone who lies in ordinary circumstances to achieve short-term convenience for someone undermines the trustworthiness of human assertion. There we go. There we go. Here's Mill's argument. Let's split it up. Here are Mill's 2 arguments. It's all one big argument technically, but you can split it up into 2 arguments. You could relabel it argument 1, argument 2, and each has premises 1, 2, etc. Here's the first argument. Keeping it close to the original and keeping in mind I have to rush out of here and get to an Augustine, get to some other class where I'm teaching Augustine. I got 15 minutes to get there. Premise 1, it's very useful to cultivate the virtue of honesty by your actions. It's one of the most useful things you can do with your actions. Premise 2, weakening that virtue is one of the most harmful things you can do with your actions. Therefore, conclusion, breaking the rule that you should be honest is in ordinary circumstances, in ordinary circumstances, breaking the rule that you should be honest just to achieve some short-term advantage is not actually useful. Premise 3, second argument. Let's go ahead and reorganize these. Let's go ahead and reorganize them. And renumber the premises. All right. Premise 1, usefulness of cultivating the virtue of honesty, harmfulness of weakening it. Conclusion, breaking the rule that you should be honest to achieve some short-term advantage is not actually useful. That's first argument for this sentence in Mill. Here's the second argument from this sentence in Mill. I guess I'll rearrange the text just a bit so it all fits in one screenshot. Any deviation from truth weakens the trustworthiness of human assertion. The trustworthiness of human assertion is the strongest support of all present social well-being. Human happiness depends on the largest scale on things that depend on the trustworthiness of human assertion. Now, for both reasons of premises 2 and 3, because anyone who lies in ordinary circumstances aimed to achieve some short-term convenience or someone undermines the trustworthiness of human assertion, because of all that, that kind of lying makes you an enemy of the human race. This is Mill's very interesting defense of honesty, the virtue of honesty and telling the truth in nearly all circumstances. Now that I think of it, this should be in the Philosophers in Their Own Words playlist and Great Arguments in Philosophy. If my brain holds up, maybe I'll do that, but I gotta get out of here. I hope this recorded properly. Thanks for watching.